Welcome to the Hart Leadership Program event that we are sponsoring, a conversation about failure and what we learned from it. And thank you, sorry, Anna. My name is Gunther Peck, I'm the director of the Hart Leadership Program, and I'm really glad that we can be here in person and online as we think collectively together tonight and moving forward about what we learn from each other, what we learn from our experience, our reflection about the things we care most about in success and failure and leadership, which we desperately need at this moment. So really looking forward to this conversation tonight. So I have the great pleasure of introducing the moderator, Professor Alexandra Zagbayou, who is new to Stanford, new to Duke. We're thrilled to have her here. She's an associate professor of the practice at the School of Public Policy. As a leadership, policy, and community engagement practitioner, Alexandra is animated by the following questions. What rules of life allow for an integrated, joyful, and purposeful life? That question, we should just pause and just let that sit for a moment. We need that more than ever. What are the core tenets of equity-centered leadership? And how do we prepare leaders to be effective equity champions? As a coach, she hopes to create a supportive and challenging environment that invites her clients to take control of their gifts, their voices, their dreams, and their daily decisions in service of themselves. Prior to joining the faculty at Duke, Alexandra was part of the founding team of Student University, Student U, in Durham, North Carolina. Over her 13-plus year tenure, she helped grow the organization tenfold, served the organization as Director of Operations, High School Program Director, Chief Program Officer, and Executive Director. During her season of leadership, Student U changed its mission, acquired a 55,000 square foot building, which is fabulous, brokered an $11 million renovation project without debt, implemented structures to increase collaboration, and shared decision-making across the organization, and transitioned from a white people-led organization to a people of color-led organization at the board and staff levels. She is most grateful and proud of the relationships she built with students, parents, co-workers, peers, and what they taught her about her values, her vision for her community, and her role in it. While she is not teaching or causing good trouble in Durham, love that phrase, good trouble. Oh, John Lewis, thank you as well. You can catch Alexandra hosting a supper club, dancing to the sound of djembe on Saturday mornings, watching school board meetings, sending her friends random memes she finds on Instagram, planning her next trip to the Ivory Coast, or cussing while working out. For that especially. Alexandra is a proud immigrant from the Ivory Coast, child of a first-generation college student, and the second of 7 children. She does this work in honor of her parents who gave her the world. And we're grateful for that gift. Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Gunther. Hello, everybody. It's so delightful to be here with you all for our conversation, a Hart conversation about failure and leadership and success. Gunther said a lot of things. He was very kind. I think most importantly, I'm a practitioner of leadership, and most of what I have learned or experienced has come through trying and failing, which is what we're going to talk about today. Before I introduce our incredible panelists, I think it's really important to say that we know that these conversations are vulnerable, and so want to give you a huge thank you for demonstrating leadership by even choosing to be a part of this conversation today. And I think particularly important, I'm new to the Duke community, but I asked some of my students, how would you define the values and the culture of Duke? And they said Duke is a place that prioritizes excellence, hard work, self-discipline, curiosity, and a little bit competitive. As we think about, to me, that means that this conversation is even more important and necessary to think about how can we foster a space where trying and learning by doing is an important part of our conceptions of what it means to lead, to succeed, to be excellent even. So with that, I'm gonna call my panelists over and I'm going to introduce them and then I'll read their bios. Olivia Reneau, Lizzy Kramer, and Daisy Almonte. Olivia Reneau, she, her, hers, is a senior, double majoring in history and public policy. She's from Valparaiso, Florida, and has lived in the South most of her life. She's a former Political Engagement Project Fellow here in the Hart Leadership Program, as well as a Mellon Mays Fellow. Prior to these fellowships, she was a member of the Penny Pilgrim George Women's Leadership Initiative, and Paulus Director's Undergraduate Fellow, and has held various other roles in research support, and undergraduate teaching assistance. In her spare time, Olivia likes to dance, she likes to cook, and she likes to reread mid-20s young adult dystopian fiction. Thank you so much for joining us today, Olivia. Next, we have Lizzy Kramer, she, her, hers, a former Soul and Lackey Fellow, class of 2022. Lizzy is completing an interdepartmental major in cultural anthropology and public policy with a certificate in human rights. She was inspired to study cultural anthropology in her first-year seminar about the U.S.-Mexico border, which combined an artwork and narratives told by migrants to create a holistic understanding of the border. After this, she became interested in ways communities can unite through art and social action to change the policies that oppress them. She pursues this interest by working with local artists to use art as a form of social resistance and empowerment. On campus, she works as a gallery guide at the National Museum of Art, and off campus, she works at 9th Street Bakery and the Community Empowerment Fund. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lizzy. And last but certainly not least, we have Daisy Almonte, former PPS student in class of 2020. From Turkey, North Carolina, Daisy Almonte, she, her, hers, is a second-year law student at Harvard Law School. She's a first-generation daughter of Mexican immigrants and graduated from Duke University with an interdepartmental major in public policy and sociology. While at Duke, she held leadership roles with Duke Student Government, Miente, Lambda Theta Alpha, Duke Defiant American, and local nonprofit Student Action with Farm Workers. She's a Mellon Mays Fellow, BN Duke Scholar, Baldwin Scholar, and a Truman Scholar. As a law student, she has worked on issues at the intersection of criminal and immigration law through Harvard's Cremigration Clinic and on community lawyering projects with Beyond Legal Aid. Daisy will be returning to the litigation practice at the law firm this summer. A powerhouse. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies. My first question for you all is, what does failure mean to you?
I guess I can go ahead and start. I think when I think of failure, I immediately think of intrinsically versus extrinsically defined failure. I think an example of extrinsically defined failure, I was a PEP fellow last year. We typically have a community partner that we work with over our PEP summer. We create a deliverable. We're supposed to interface as much as we can with that community partner. The community partner that I selected, which I think is sometimes the curse of nonprofit work, was, this was also during COVID too, was stretched incredibly thin staffing and resource-wise. That was a summer that I was home briefly. A family member had health problems. I fell off communication-wise. I returned. They fell off communication-wise. They returned. Our relationship ultimately dissolved, and I was left stranded and was certain, I failed. I failed to work with this community partner. I failed to deliver on the expectations. That situation ended up panning out fine, but I definitely think that was like failure, I guess, in the traditional sense, where you failed to supply something that you said you were going to, meet the demands, rise to the occasion, etc. If somebody wants to speak about intrinsic conflict or internal. Anything else?
Hi, yeah. Yeah, so I very much agree with Olivia in distinguishing the two kinds of failure that plague us. And honestly, for me, I think intrinsic failure has been a hard battle to fight here at Duke. And I think for me, it's manifested in a lot of ways in coming to Duke. I had a lot of hopes and expectations for myself and how I would perform. And I found my sophomore year, I just wasn't happy here. I was really sad, and the things that made me a Duke student, somebody who's excited about class and invested in the community culture, just weren't occurring for me. And for me, that felt like I had failed deeply, that I had this hope of coming to college. And so I actually, as a result, took a semester off to try what if without Duke would be better for this. And in some ways it was. In some ways it wasn't. But I think for me, it was just this lesson of like giving up school for a semester and not going to school, like it extrinsically felt very much like a failure. Like it wasn't something that occurred in my family or had ever even been in my mind. But internally, it felt like one of the greatest successes I've ever done is knowing when to say, it's been my time, like I need to walk away for a break. So I think, yeah, that's how it's shown up for me.
Thank you for sharing so vulnerably.
Well, I just have to say they said it best. I think for me, up until I went off beyond the walls of Duke, if you had asked me this question like before, I would have said, oh, like my biggest failure at Duke was like more in the traditional sense, like Olivia was mentioning, like, oh, like I can kind of show you I ran for Duke Student Government President my junior year. I did not win. Like that's a failure, like pretty, checks the box of like what failure is for most people. But now asking me that question now, I would say failure is more so when you fail yourself and kind of like what does it mean to fail yourself and fail to kind of show up for yourself and make sure that you're being kind to yourself, taking care of yourself and prioritizing yourself and your happiness above, what you think success is supposed to be.
Thank you all so much for sharing a number of your answers. There seems to be a shift somewhere in what you thought failure was previously to where we are now. We'll get there. I'm interested in, as you think about and reflect on your own life, who taught you about failure and what did they tell you failure was before these moments of new enlightenment and change? And I'll share. I'm blessed to come from a family of, I describe them as giants. Two parents who were incredibly accomplished, and a sister who's brilliant, like went to school for free, valedictorian, all the stuff. And I think my parents taught me about failure by never talking about it. There was never a conversation about who there were, any trials, any tribulations. All I know is my parents are brilliant, they've done all the things. My sister is brilliant, they've done all the things. So anything that is not being brilliant and being the best is a failure. They never said that. They never were like, Alexandra, if you're not like us, you will fail us. But by not talking about anything outside of their accomplishments, taught me as a little girl that was the standard in the bar. Anything outside of that was not only a failure, but a disgrace to my family, right? And so lived a considerable amount of my life with that perceived understanding of what it meant to be successful or failing. So that for me, those are the people who taught me about failure and how it ruled my life for a long part of my life. I'm interested to hear who taught you about failure and how did those early learnings influence your education and sense of self?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I think me learning about failure echoes a lot of what you just said of there was never a conversation about failure. I think more so there was conversations about what it meant to succeed and coming from an immigrant family, what it meant to succeed in this country. So there was a lot of emphasis put on school. And like I'll share, like I think we came when I was 6 years old and it was kind of like this insignificant moment I think for my parents, but very significant for me where it's like, we came to this country so that you can go to school and so that you can make the best of like the education like system here. And so all that pretty much echoes a lot of kind of what you shared, that it's not really what failure is, but failure is the absence of excellence in school. And then kind of to add a different perspective, I think going off of what Lizzy was saying, I think there was sort of a failure was to not be that like overachieving student in throughout K through 12 and like at Duke. And I think growing up when a lot of people are just like telling you, like I happen to like be good at tests and like happen to be good at what our current education system sees as success. And so because of that, I kind of grew up being told like, you know, you're so smart, you're so gifted, like blah, 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 and it kind of made me think that like I was supposed to be so smart and like so overachieving effortlessly and naturally that it was something that I kind of was just like a part of who I was. And so whenever, you know, skipping ahead when I got to like law school, which was a little bit different and more challenging in a lot of different ways, I thought that I was failing. And it wasn't because someone told me that that was failing, but because it was just kind of very different from what I was used to and what I had internalized, even if no one had sat down and told me that explicitly.
Thank you for sharing.
I also think no one, I can't recall any moment where someone explicitly told me, especially my parents, you know, this is failure. I definitely think there was more teaching about success. I have my father's in the military for 20 plus years and has really heavily invested. I'm also the eldest daughter, which I think is a unique, because I see some nodding over here. So my dad has really heavily invested in and my mom as well, but they both really heavily invested in my education and success. And I think of a phone call that I had with my dad the other day. I'm in the middle of the dreaded job search for anyone else who may be a senior in here, and I'm trying to arrange my priorities. You know, do I want to live close to my family? Do I want a job that's lucrative? Do I want a job that is personally fulfilling? And I think those, for me, a lot of those things have proven to be at odds. So I was telling my dad about that, and he said, I hope you know that, you know, your mother and I, if it comes down to being close to home and success, we hope you choose success. And I think that statement perfectly encapsulates that it's not about the learning or being taught what failure is, it's being taught like a definition of success. Like I think my parents, and I love them so dearly for investing this much like faith in me. My parents are like, you were literally born to change the world. And I was like, what if I was born to write 2 really excellent history books? Like just, what if I was born to, I saw a TikTok, admittedly, that was like the urge to buy an electric scooter and deliver food in an urban, green urban town. Like what if that was born to be my impact? So I think while my parents never taught me about failure, I think there's tension between what they taught me about success and what I might come to consider to be a life well lived.
Absolutely. I also want to take a second to speak about my family because I feel like that was the most formative in my idea of success and failure, which I noticed when I got to Duke was a lot different than a lot of Duke students, I think. And I think I realized as I reflected, my mom immigrated and she had a really hard time adjusting to life in the US. And me and my mom both have very agreeable personalities that we like to say yes and go along with things. And so the hardest thing she drilled into me in my childhood was you can always give up. Anything I did, whether it was summer camp or piano or like soccer, it was always you can give up at any time, which seems like the opposite of what parents usually say, right? Like I was never pushed to do more, do better. But it ended up being like one of the most beautiful gifts of life that she's given me because throughout my time at Duke, I have quit so much and so much for the better. And I think this idea really showed up when I was taking my gap semester. I originally took it because I wanted to be a politically engaged student and work on an election campaign for the 2020 election. So I got a job as a field organizer for Carolina Federation, which was an organization that I really aligned with and liked. And I went to 1 day of training, which is 8 hours or whatever, it was a work day. And at the end of the day, I was like, it's not for me. And I remember feeling I was so distraught because I was like, have I done wrong? Have I failed? And I remember calling Professor Carnes and asking him, I was like, am I doing a terrible thing if I just quit right now? I remember him saying, just think about what your values are here in the moment. And I realized, I was like, the number one reason that I wanted to take time off school, while it would be useful to use it to build my career and build political energy, I was taking time off for my mental health because we were in the middle of a pandemic. And that led to me having the room in that semester to explore the arts. I ended up connecting with a local muralist who I helped and a gallery that I worked at, and that has borne the entire course of my college since then. That's what I'm writing my thesis about, what I'm applying to jobs in. And it's like, I never would have had the confidence or knowledge that that was an option without having walked away from Carolina Federation after one day.
Beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm gonna like give you some snacks and other things. So a lot of you talk about this story of birth, families, expectation, culture, and trying to find your way through that, honoring where we're from and the stories and legacies of our families while finding our own path. Part of that is understanding how to embrace failure. And so I'm curious about, in your own lives, were there particular moments, conversations, or experience that helped you see failure not as an enemy, but as a part of your process for self-discovery, for growth and success?
I would love to go, if you guys don't mind. I can finish telling the story about the nonprofit organization that our relationship dissolved. I panicked and was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And I'm a Mellon Fellow, so I was also in the middle of my Mellon summer, and then I was working on a thesis at the same time for public policy. Got into these archives that I was working on for my Mellon summer, and realized that there were these incredibly rich stories of Black generational land ownership in these deed records in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I would not have had the resources without PEP to be able to afford my rent, get my groceries, because I wasn't doing like typical kind of waged work as you might as a student worker at Duke. And I transitioned like 1,000% into looking at all of the deed records in my Mellon project, and my Mellon project has now turned into a thesis in the history department. I was a very late history major, by the way, like junior spring late, which they let you do apparently. But I went 110% into that project, and it's actually been, as much as I enjoyed my public policy thesis, the way that I feel about that thesis and the way that it was connected to my interest in PEP was in Black agricultural firms, co-ops, workers, etc., in the kind of RTP area. Tallgrass Food Box is excellent for those of you who know what that is. But I saw how those stories were linked, and even though I was not pursuing rural economic justice in the way that I thought I was going to with this nonprofit, I am connected to that story still in the story of Black generational land ownership, Black individuals' interaction with the land in the South, and its historical origins in the thesis that I am completing now. And as much as I wish my relationship with that nonprofit had not dissolved, and I wish I had been able to follow through, I don't regret the outcome. And I am, in fact, I'm very sincerely happy to be a Mellon, to still be a PEP Fellow, and to still be involved with the program, and to be able to look at the other PEP Fellows. We have a wonderful class of new PEP Fellows, and be like, it may not work out. I have nothing else I can say to you, that it may not work out in the way that you think that it's gonna work out, but it will be fine. And I don't think that is said to Duke students enough. Like, people don't say, it may not work out the way that you thought it will, but the sky will not fall. So I think that was a big moment in understanding failure for me.
I think I have just two quick moments that I'll share. One is I'll talk about, since it's relevant to Duke student life, losing the Duke student government election. So it was I think the moment for me was realizing that I had been thinking about it in a way of if I become like president of Duke Student Government, there's all these things that like I can do as like a first generation student, as a low income student, as a Latina, as a Mexican student, and like there's so many ideas that I want to put on the table. There's so many perspectives that I want to elevate, and there's so many things that I want to like fight for. And I already had like a position in DSG, and there were a lot of different like things that I was pursuing also at the time. But I think what I learned from losing that election was like, if there's something that you want to do, and then later on in life I would learn that it applied for things outside of just like roles in an organization. But if there's something that you want to pursue, whether it's like in an organization or like in your life, like in your personal life, like what can you do about it like then and now? Like it was only after I lost that election that I realized that there were so many of my ideas that I had for the presidency could have been things that I could have fought for as a senator or even like as a vice president of the Equity and Outreach Committee, and that I was like, well, I'm only the vice president of the E&O committee, so I can only do this. I need to win, like, I need to become president so that I can do like XYZ, my platform, blah, blah, blah. And it was only after I lost the election that I was like, but who said that I could only do XYZ as VP of E&O? Like, I could have gone for it and just, I didn't need that position. So that's kind of like one of the defining moments for me, and the way that that has translated post-Duke and into like the real life is that like in law school, I've been kind of like, I had to make a choice between, do I want to pursue the traditional gold stars? Do I want to do Harvard Law Review? Do I want to like kill myself trying to get the perfect grades all the time so I can go clerk for the Supreme Court? And like, that's what I thought I wanted to do when I picked Harvard. Like I picked Harvard over Stanford because I was like, the Harvard Law Review is more prestigious than the Stanford Law Review. And most of the Supreme Court justices are from Harvard Law School, not from Stanford. And that's why I picked Harvard. And like, and now I'm there, and I did not take the exam for Harvard Law Review. I do not care about becoming a clerk, but I am pursuing the work that I want to pursue, that I wanted to pursue after I did all those things. I'm doing it now. Instead of spending 40 hours a week on Harvard Law Review editing journals that like I do not care about, I'm spending 40 hours a week on the intersection of like criminal law and immigration law. And instead of pursuing like 14 hours a week studying, I'm doing 14 hours like doing things that I care about, like contributing to voting rights litigation in my home state of North Carolina. So that I think was a defining moment in undergrad that has helped me put things into perspective even afterwards.
That was amazingly spoken, Daisy. Just wanted to take a second to recognize that. I think as y'all were talking, what came to mind for me of when failure was a tool, or a good thing, I guess a tool is kind of a funny word for it. My freshman year, I started working with, as I mentioned, I connected with local muralists in the area. And his name's Cornelio Campus. He's been a dear friend throughout all of college for me. And I remember when I went to the first mural that he was hosting students to come and help him paint, he just kind of handed me a paintbrush and was like, go for it. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is your art. You're just gonna let me, like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, go crazy on it? And so I did, and I made a lot of mistakes. And like, you can still see them in the mural today. And so a few years later, I was talking with Cornelio, I was like, why would you do that? Like, you know how to make a good mural for the public. And he's like, but it would never be your mural. It would never be your chance to learn, and you'd never begin to understand your own things. So it was just, it struck me how in that moment, watching us paint, he could have been telling us exactly what to do to make a beautiful piece of art. But we wouldn't have learned in the same way that now, walking past that mural, I'm like, okay, now I know how to blend colors. I wouldn't do that. Yeah, so I just think Cornelio, for me, has served as a great role model of how failure can be built into teaching.
That's so good. The last question I'm going to ask before we open it to the floor and to our Zoom panelists is, what do you want to tell your younger self? Daisy, you are now at Harvard. Olivia, Lizzy, you are older. Imagine it's orientation week and you're giving the talk to all of the Duke students who are coming. What is the one thing you wish you want to tell them about failure?
very hard. I want to stall to think. I think as Daisy and I, well, I guess I am a melon. Once a melon, always a melon, I think Dr. Jaji would say. But I think as someone who is, Mellon is a pre-PhD fellowship for people for underrepresented people in the kind of traditional academic spaces. And I don't necessarily know that I came to Duke thinking that I would fall so deeply in love with academia and the institutions that support learning and generate lifelong learners. So I think I would say to my younger self, like, your journey is not going to look like your peers. It's not going to look like the consulting track folks, and that's not even to say to like in any way disparage people who choose consulting. It's just like they have a schedule. We do not. So it's not going to look like, you're not going to have an exact schedule. You're not going to know when to expect to hear back from people. It's not going to look like the campaign folks either, who have probably developed some relationship with an individual that they believe really deeply in their kind of their electoral potential and are deeply devoted to their cause. And it's not going to look like, you know, any of my other peers who are doing, you know, any other diverse, incredible things. Like, it will be uniquely my path, and so long as I wanted to say don't stray the course, but there's no course to stray. So just knowing that it's not going to look, I would tell myself, whatever you think you're about to do, you're not about to do it. And you don't waste time comparing your path and how your path looks to others to your peers when you are deeply motivated by like the core values of that path, which are education, learning, equity, justice. So I hope I bought y'all some time to think.
So I think in a lot of the senses of the failures that we've discussed today, different internships and taking time off, I don't think I would change anything for my younger self, because I think I learned the most through that. But I think if I were to go back, I would just tell my younger self that the biggest failures that I will experience were failures of friendships, of relationships, of mentors. And I would tell myself to have care, know that those are coming, and just learn as much as I can from each one and try and show up better next time. Because I think in the grand scheme of things, all the tricks I had on school, the D's I got on paper, the class that I withdrew from, it all made sense in the end, and now I know why that happened. But I think the part of my life that I'm still piecing through is failures within interpersonal connection. So I think I would just tell my younger self to note that earlier. I don't have an answer for it yet.
I think what I would say to like not only my younger self, but also if I was just talking to like a bunch of like students that were about to start like their first year of college, I would say like, when you think that you're failing, when you think that you have failed or you're like on the verge of failure, to like take a step back and just reflect, like, is it actually a failure, and like for whom, and why, like, do you think that you're failing and that it's a failure? Because like I think when I was going through all these like realizations my first semester of law school, like I really thought that I was failing because I wasn't the same person at Harvard Law School that I was at Duke University, and I thought that was failure. And I was convinced that I was failing, and that I was failing all my mentors at Duke, and that I was failing my family, and that I was just like failure. And it wasn't until I like came home and I talked to my mom, and like I just told her how difficult it was, not only like because of the academic and like competitive like nature of it, but because of just like it was really emotionally taxing to be in those like walls and to realize that the law is not what you thought it was, and that it's not as easy to change it as you thought it was, and just feeling like you went in being such a like naive, like dumb person, just all these things. And it wasn't until like that moment that I came home and like I was telling her like how hard it was, and she was just like, you know, you can just always drop out. Like, I mean, like you've already made us proud, like, you know, you're good. And that's when I realized like, oh, like I'm doing this law degree like for myself, and like I still, even after she told me that, like I still want to get this degree, and like it's not failing. Like I'm allowed to change, and I wouldn't change anything about my Duke experience, and it's okay if my Harvard law experience doesn't mirror my Duke experience, it's okay for like me to change, and it's not failing. I'm changing, I'm growing, and like in a way I'm learning how to succeed in different ways. So like I would say when you're like, when you're deciding to withdraw from a class and you're like, this is obviously failure, like, no, maybe it's not. Maybe you're learning to like succeed in different ways. So like just like taking that step back and analyzing like the context of like what you think is like that failure that you're going through.
Thank you all so much, Ms. Jerry. Do we have questions from the audience for our panelists?
Yeah, can you come to the microphone? I can just say it out loud. Hello. Yeah, thanks so much for talking. This is so awesome. I just have a question related to the idea of like changing the world, which I think you mentioned. I think we're all taught if we want to do good in the world, we have to change it in some profound way. And I just wanted to know how you guys have grappled with that in your own lives and like dealing with the pressure of some of people telling you that all the time, and even just finding your own place and what your role in the world could be that's sustainable for you and also for the passions that you carry.
I feel like I had started this conversation, so I am more than happy to go first. Yeah, the changing the world thing is real. I think especially if you are underrepresented at Duke, I think there is the feeling that there are real stakes to being here. This is not a game. There is not a lot of time for leisure. And even if there is, you ultimately came here to succeed, and those are your priorities. I think I guess I'll call it a reframe that I had was I joined the history department late, and I had the pleasure of taking not one, but 2 classes with Dr. Tavolia Glimpf. She has written 2 incredible books in her career, and encountering her changed my world. She acted like in a way that was, I would say, unprecedented, but I also encountered Dr. Rose and Dr. Adrienne Lund-Smith. So perhaps not unprecedented, but the mentorship and genuine sense of care and compassion that I felt, for me, changed my world, changed how I viewed academia. And her legacy on scholarship, she just had a book come out, just had a book that came out, I think last year now, that won like 8 major historical awards, which is like, I don't know if I can impress how incredible that is. But those books are changing the world too. The fact that I got to have the pleasure of encountering the books and now owning them and encountering her and knowing that she as a person, a Black woman in academia, cared for me and my well-being, my intellectual growth. Like, if my legacy were Dr. Glimpf's legacy, then I would look back on my life and be like, I have changed the world and I wouldn't even argue tiny way, in my profoundly important way. So I think the reframe was like, whose world am I trying to change? What is the scope of the world? And even if the world is not changing how, American or global politics works, did I change something that means a profound amount to someone else? And that having encountered that, I think I can rest on that a little bit more.
I can go ahead. I think one thing that I had in mind for my freshman year when I came here was I had always been good at writing throughout high school, and I'd learned to give up the dream of being a fiction author like earlier in high school. And I came to Duke thinking, okay, if I can write, the way I'm gonna be of most use for the world is by being in policy and writing good policy. And I drilled that into myself my freshman and sophomore year, doing all these endless policy memos on things that they were important things, but the things that I were writing, it wasn't me in them. And I think I had this moment of reckoning after my time off of, maybe I have the skills to do writing and to be in the policy world, but it's not where my brain operates best. And if that's true, there's always going to be some friction. And that's when I started exploring more community organizing, more face-to-face interviewing and podcasting. And it's like in those ways, I found ways that I connected with the work I loved, and the work spoke to me, and it felt like it was all the better for it. I think that was where it sort of shifted in my Duke experience.
I'll say this was like a really rough thing for me, the pressure of like changing the world. Like I have wanted to be an attorney since I was like 6 years old because I wanted to change the world. And when I went to my first semester of law school and we were in the pandemic and it was remote, I was still up in Cambridge, and the world was like falling to pieces around me. And I realized like I'm first generation like high school graduate, college graduate, like I'm just first, and I didn't know like how the law, like how the legal system worked. And like I thought that you could go to court and like just argue like Your Honor, like this is racist, like, you know, like da, 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 and like you can't do that. And like, you know, the people in power, the laws are made by people in power, the court procedure, civil procedure is set by people in power. And I realized when I was in that first semester of law school, you know, I started thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm certainly not the first person that came to law school with the intention to change the world. And if so many people before me have come to law school and become attorneys with the intention of changing the world hasn't changed, like, so they failed, and like that means I'm gonna fail too. Like that means like I'm not gonna change the world. Like if so many people before me couldn't do it, like what was I thinking that I could do this? And it was like we were reading a case in one of my classes where the whole opinion was like debating whether a tomato was a fruit or a vegetable. And I was like, this is not what I came to law school for. Like I was so dumb, I was so naive, like, and that feeling of like, that was such a heavy feeling. And the way that like I've been able to come to terms with it and to like continue and like my legal career is like, you know, because it's overwhelming if you think about it like that, like you're just going to be so overwhelmed and you're going to give up and you're just going to think like it's just going to take you to like a dark place. And I just started thinking, you know what, you know, I may not end like this systemic like thing, like I may not be like the one, no one might be the one to do that, but I can join a community of people that are dedicating their lives to chip away at it some way, somehow. And I can contribute my time like in law school to projects that are meaningful and that are helping people's lives like every day, instead of, you know, chasing the prestige. And, you know, there's trade-offs to everything, but like, it's kind of how I've come to terms with it, is like, okay, like it's not my job to kind of like eliminate, for example, like detention centers for like immigrants, but like if I can help to shut one down and make sure that the people in it are not just transferred to another one, what's a strategic way that I can use the civil procedure rules that I have like learned in my class to make sure that I like shut down this center, and that wouldn't shut down, they don't just get transferred to another one. What are the legal tools that I have at my disposal to make sure that instead they get sent home? And then once they're sent home, how do I use the legal tools at my disposal to make sure that they don't get ankle monitors placed on them? What are the ways that I can use like the dumb case about the tomato being a fruit or a vegetable to like help these people? And I'm not gonna like end everything or, you know, revolutionize civil procedure, but I can chip away and figure out ways to make people's lives like better. So that's the way that I've learned to like deal with it, because it was a slap in the face when I just got there and I was like, oh my god, like this is what the law is, this is what the legal system is. So that's kind of how I've like managed it.
Thanks for sharing. What I hear also in your stories is this idea of following your passion, and that by following your passion and your values, then the outcome of that may be changing your small community, changing the world. And so the question that you ask is the interesting one of, where do we start? Do we start by thinking, I want to change the world? Or do we start by thinking, I want to change myself and be the most, think about the best version of myself living into my values, and that the outcome of that transformation that starts with us will have transformation on communities, right? I think when you often read people that we admire, a lot of them thought, I'm going to change the world. A lot of them were just like, I'm trying to survive, and these are my values, and oh wow, I'll have a Nobel Peace Prize, right? And so it's not quite like that, but the idea that the external and the internal are always in conversation, and that the leaders that we often look to have spent the most time thinking about the internal and the impacts of that, and how do we start at Duke to do the work of focusing on the internal gain so that we can have the external impact that we're looking for might be a place for us to consider. I think I have two more back there, and then maybe we almost need to wrap up. But yes.
I can predict.
There are people on Zoom who can't.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, my name is Gus Grass. I'm a freshman here at Duke. I'm wondering, Daisy, you mentioned something really interesting at the beginning about how you currently define failing as failing yourself, not failing at a specific action. I've definitely experienced that, and I've kind of like learned ways to react when I feel as though I failed myself, and examining how to respond to that and how that makes me feel. I'm wondering, how do you respond when you feel as though someone else has failed you?
The questions are not getting easier.
Yeah, well, I think I've actually been thinking about this a lot. Whenever, like, you know, you have control over like yourself and like your actions, but you never have control over someone else's actions. And so what I started to kind of think about is like, how can I provide for myself what I was expecting, like, from like that other person, whether it was a mentor that failed you, someone like a friend, or someone like closer to you. How can I be there for myself in the way that I expected like that person to be? And sometimes it's not as concrete, but I'm thinking, for example, like if you had you imagine that someone was going to, like, let's say, I'll use an example. I'm Latina, I'm Mexican, I go to Harvard, and I think that like there's gonna be another Latino, like, Mexican person that shares my values, shares my beliefs, that if I like say something to them, like they're going to connect with me on that level and really understand me where I'm coming from. And then I realize that they actually, although we may share like that Latinx like label, they actually, there's social class like differences, there's like a lot of differences that they can't really support me or connect with me in the way that I expected them to be. And I just realized, okay, well, that friend or that like professor or that mentor is not going to be the person that I can go to for that. Maybe they're still okay for like, this other thing, like they're still helpful or there for you like in these other ways, but now I know that that person isn't really the person that's going to show up for me to fill that specific need or that specific part. And so kind of like realizing that whether it's a set of professors or a set of friends, each of them can play like a different role for you in your life, and just realizing, okay, that person isn't going to play that role for me in my life, and so I need to make note of that, set that boundary, and take note of what else you have around you, what you can provide for yourself, what other friends or professors can help to like fill in that gap of where that person like filled.
Do you all want to weigh in?
I personally don't want to weigh in, especially if I know that we have more questions. Do you?
I don't have a good answer.
Other questions?
Did we have a Zoom question?
This is from Olivia's sister, Shauna. She says, how would you say that your peers or friends have been influential in your views of leadership and failure? And would you say they were strong or minor influences as the years have passed?
Ooh, a two-part question. Shauna Abraham wrote a book. She is my peer, my dear friend. She has texted me and I have not responded. I love you dearly. But I have had the distinct pleasure of being surrounded by people who, it's that whole thing where the goal is to be the dumbest person in the room. I've had the true pleasure of being surrounded by people who were smarter, better spoken, better leaders. I am on Street Medicine, which is a dance team, and I, just to try to have a quick example, what I learned about leadership in Street Med and extracurricular, I think probably surpasses what I've learned about leadership in a lot of other areas at Duke. Managing competing interests, being respectful to people's time, mental health, project formulation, dealing with sensitive topics about equity and culture, and that's just being surrounded by people who also like to dance and like to watch dance videos or grew up dancing. So I'm not sure I got to all the aspects of the question, but I think that is an incredible thing about being at Duke is that you get to be, just by virtue of kind of who Duke attracts and who Duke selects, like you get to be surrounded by people that elevate you if you all choose to kind of elevate one another. So I think for me that's been deeply influential and in unconventional ways.
I think for me, I also would say that I've learned the most about success and failure through my friends. I think the times in which I failed my friends throughout Duke have been some of the most painful times of my life. But I also think through those failures, I learned more about failure than like any of these examples that I've shared today would show you. So I think it cuts deeper in a different way. And I think throughout Duke, I've learned that success to me isn't so much getting a good grade or getting into the class I want. And I've realized that success is investment in the people I love's life. And I think, so that in that way, my friends have shaped my idea of success and failure a lot.
Yeah, I just want to echo that sentiment real quick. I think just to, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, like I keep talking about my first semester of law school, but y'all don't know, like one day I will probably reveal a lot of other stuff about like what goes down at Harvard, but whenever that semester I was just really focusing on school, like I was just not even making time to like FaceTime like family or friends like that much. I was really just like school, and when asterisk hit the fan, like I was like, it all came down to like who the people like in my life, and that's when I kind of came home, like honestly like lived with my friends for like finals or whatever. And it's kind of like when I realized like no matter what's going on in like my professional career or like what grades I'm getting, what I'm achieving, what's being added or being taken away from my resume, what I care about the most and what is the most important is like the people I want to be surrounded by, the life I want to live alongside like what people. And as long as I have like my family and as long as I have like my friends and like y'all have said, like my friends from Duke are probably like friends that are going to be like just throughout like my life, and like as long as I have those people, I have everything, like I'm succeeding in life. And that the rest, everything else, it comes and goes. We get some opportunities, we lose some, we get some positions, we get some awards, we don't get some. And but at the end of the day, it's like making time for those FaceTimes, for like the Snapchat, Instagram, whatever, once a day to like connect with your friends. And for me, it's been like my friends showing me that their friendship is like there despite what I might be achieving or not. And that's kind of been really influential and like kind of like liberating for myself as I like have got into life after Duke.
Thank you so much for sharing so much of your stories, of your successes, your triumphs, the ways that you are learning to embrace failure. It is not easy to get in front of a group of people and a virtual audience to share these stories, and I hope that sharing them, you felt as empowered as we have been hearing about your stories and how they so influenced our lives. So thank you all so much for sharing with us. I'm going to pass it over to Gunther to close us out.
So, well, goodness, I have words escape me. I just want to say thank you so much to Olivia, to all four of you, and to the audience and the questions for those fabulous reflections. I kept thinking, yes, I can relate to every single piece that you shared. I think the only thing I would say is that we are really excited that this conversation came about because of a conversation about what we need at Duke and what our teaching needs to do more, which is to have opportunities to reflect on the experiential wisdom that you just heard. And too often that kind of, those nuggets, those rich pearls we just heard remain hidden. And so the value of them is sharing like this. And we are also really looking forward to trying something new. We have a story challenge that we're going to be hosting this spring semester called the Why Not Fail Challenge, which is an effort to actually generate a larger conversation about what we do learn from failing And it comes from, probably from Alexandra's provocation in a conversation we had last fall about what we think leadership is. Leadership is the permission to fail and to learn from it. And if you do not understand that you only learn by failing, you're never going to really figure out why you're here, what you need to do and to be. We sort of know that, but we don't actually put that insight to work. And the hope is that we will have this spring lots of opportunities to learn from as many stories as possible. The purpose is to generate a conversation, a kind of pedagogical intervention, an interruption at Duke, which we kind of need at this moment, which is to think through what we have learned collectively and to do it together, to learn by doing it. So I also want to thank Ana Ramirez, who has been instrumental in every bit of this program and is such a valued colleague. And thank you so much for your help. This is why I love being the director of the Hart Leadership Program. It's been a real honor to do this job. So thank you so much. And details will come forward online. Look for the Why Not Fail Challenge. If you like the conversation, share it with friends, encourage them. The problem we'll be having to pick winners and losers in a Why Not Fail Challenge, which contradicts the entire purpose, but we'll figure that part out. Everything has to be a competition. Oh Lord. Okay, thank you so much and congratulations.